Hello and welcome to the Teaching Transformations podcast, a collaboration between the Academy for Sustainable Futures and the Careers and Enterprise Service at Canterbury Christ Church University. I'm your host, Jack Swan. In this podcast, we interview lecturers and course leaders and ask them how they've managed to embed sustainability into their course and their teaching. Dr Susan Kenyon is a principal lecturer in politics in the School of Law, Policing and Social Sciences. Susan is an expert in innovative pedagogies, and her subject expertise includes travel behaviour science, behaviour change, environment and exclusion. I asked Susan to kick us off by giving us a broad review of how sustainability is taught at different year groups and levels of the politics curriculum. So Susan, thank you so much for joining us today. Really excited to have you here. You've got a real wealth of experiences in the faculty generally and on the courses that you teach about sustainability and how you've embedded that in your teaching. Take us through whether you want to start with your courses or your faculty, whatever you want to begin with.
Absolutely. Well, I teach politics and politics international relations. Really, sustainability has always been embedded in what we do ever since we started the course 25 years ago. And in fact, reflecting that, we're just redeveloping our course to really focus on global sustainability as well. Because if we think about politics is all about power. And when we think about sustainability, however you define sustainability, and I think we'll probably talk about all the different definitions of sustainability as we go through today, sustainability, the causes of unsustainable worlds, the solutions that we're putting together, it's all about, and who has the power there, it's all about who has the power. The differential power relations have caused what some people might call the environmental crisis. The differential power relations are embedded in how we're responding to it and who's affected by it as well. So who has the power? What should we be tackling? Really reinterpreting and employing critical thinking to issues around sustainability, I think, have always been embedded for us. So yeah, lots to talk about today.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's start with environment and exclusion, which is one of your courses. Tell us a bit about that, what it looks like, what you're focusing on, the pedagogical approach you're taking there.
Yeah, absolutely. So environment and exclusion is just a little bit what it says on the tin, really. So we look at the links between environmental problems and social exclusion. So this is a third year module with us in politics, and it grew out of a module called Transport, Politics and Society, where I really wanted to empower our students with the skills to be able to make a difference in the world. So what we find is when people join a politics and international relations course, they usually join because they want to change something. There's usually something in the world that they want to influence. So I'm passionate about giving students the skills that they need to be able to go forward and change things. And you mentioned sustainable education as well. The pedagogies that I tend to use and that we use across the team are really empowering. So we want to empower our students with the skills that they're going to need to make a difference in the world, in their own individual lives, in their communities if they choose to go into politics as well, but also thinking about making a difference in business or in whatever institution they happen to be in. So environment and exclusion really looks at that and helps students to conceive problems and design solutions to that. So they start with a problem that they have identified, an environmental problem that they've identified that affects them or their local community. And then I support them to understand the problem. Where is it coming from? Which power structures have developed that problem? And which power structures and which stakeholders do you need to tackle in order to make a difference to that problem? And I teach them to understand the stakeholder, understand why the stakeholder is behaving in that way, and then different routes in to influence that stakeholder and then get the outcome that they want as well. So it's quite an innovative pedagogy, and it's also quite an innovative way of approaching politics in terms of subject matter as well, because we really want to empower students with hope. There's a lot of negativity in the world, especially around issues of climate change and sustainable development. And I think it's really important that we give students the hope that they can make a difference. And of course, at Christ Church, that's what we're all about, isn't it, as well? It's embedded in our vision too.
What's really exciting that you mentioned there is talking about this facilitation process and really guiding and supporting students to discover this for themselves. The only thing I wanted to zoom back in on is when you're talking about them identifying the problem right at the start. Are you giving them a range of issues to look at, or are you leaving it entirely of their own volition to identify what needs to be worked on?
Entirely of their own volition. That's right. So I do this in another module. So our first year module, one of the first modules that our first years when they join us will do is a wonderful module, which I co-teach with a number of my colleagues, called How to Change the World. And in that module, we encourage students to identify a problem for themselves as well. Then as they go through the years, in their first year, they have How to Change the World. In their second year, they have Insight for Impact. And in the third year, they have Environment and Exclusion. So by the time they get to Environment and Exclusion, they're very used to developing critical thinking and identifying a problem that they could make a difference to. We encourage them not to try to bring down global capitalism, for example. That's not really attainable. So we encourage them to focus on a difference they can make in their community. Because my background in transport and travel behaviour studies, I do tend to steer them towards transport as both an exclusionary problem and also an environmental problem, and looking at those things in tandem as well. But we've had students identifying all sorts of different issues that affect them or their student community or their community back home where they live as well.
Any particularly memorable ones?
Lots of them, as I mentioned, are to do with resolving accessibility issues, because if people can't get places, they can't do stuff. And that's really important. The stuff that they can't do is really important. Hospital appointments or social networking, or accessing their studies. Obviously, we're in a higher education institution, and we know at Christ Church 2/3 of our students are commuters. So actually looking into how you access your education sustainably without causing greater harm to the environment is really important. So students have tended to look at those kinds of issues, be it from making a road crossing safer so that more people feel they can be included in that society, looking at the difference between who is in a car park and who is at a bus station, and then thinking about, well, why is it that we tend to see certain people in certain places? How can we make transport and activity participation more inclusive without just increasing mobility? Because, of course, mobility has negative environmental consequences if you don't get it quite right.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those wicked problems, as so many of these are. There's always trade-offs and so forth to be found.
Yeah.
Really impressive to have that sort of triplet of the How to Change the World and then Insight for Impact and then Environment and Exclusion. Yeah. And like you say, these courses, or the overall politics course, has been running for 25 years. So it sounds like some of this has been in place for quite some time, but I'm sure in that time as well, you'll have encountered various challenges in assembling this and making sure it all runs smoothly. Can you talk to some of the barriers you faced when implementing this and developing the pedagogy around it?
I'm not sure that I talk in terms of challenges. I think so many opportunities to work with our students. Really, I think the challenges come when you think about how you can practically support students to work towards a more reasonable goal. So I mentioned before, trying to persuade them, actually, you might identify that capitalism is the way that our economic system is set up, is a core underpinning cause of some issues of unsustainable development. But actually, it's not within our students' gift to make an immediate difference to that. So actually, the balance between empowering students to make a difference and supporting them to do that in a reasonable way is quite important. We also, in How to Change the World, we talk a lot about different ways of impacting the political agenda, and we do talk about issues such as protest, environmental protest and activism and civil disobedience as well. We teach that very, very carefully. We teach about the pros and the cons, but always within legality and Christ Church values as well. So making sure that you frame that kind of discourse is really important. But it's just such a great opportunity to be able to support people who can go forward and make a difference. And I feel really lucky to teach on the courses on the course that I teach on the modules that I've helped to create here.
And when we were talking prior to starting this interview, you're saying there's also so much going on across the faculty as well. Are there any other pockets of best practice that you'd want to highlight and draw on?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, within the politics team, we have more practical policy analysts like myself, and I tend to be quite focused on the UK, but of course teaching global sustainability and global politics. We have people who are working in specialists in Africa in security studies as well. We have specialists in racism and other forms of exclusion. We even have a specialist in space politics and looking at the environmental impacts of space and space politics as well. So we have such a wonderful range in our own politics team. On the international relations level, also political theorists, really looking at radical political thought as well, and how we can understand the world in multiple different ways. But the faculty itself spans from engineering all the way through to sociology. And as the politics team, we work with our colleagues across the faculty. So I work quite closely with engineering as well, and thinking about how we can bring our students together. Because obviously, if you're trying to create solutions to sustainability, we need critical thinking, of course, but we need to work with others who are implementing more practical solutions too. So for me, bringing our students together with engineers or criminologists or counterterrorism experts, for example, is incredibly important. So we're really lucky to work in such a broad faculty and to have those connections all the way across.
Yeah, that theme of interdisciplinarity is something that's come up again and again through the interviews, perhaps unsurprisingly when we're talking to so many different disciplines.
Yeah.
Have you had any particularly interesting encounters around this theme of sustainability at those junctures? And can you tell us about any of those?
Absolutely. So our engineering colleagues are wonderful. They're free thinkers, but of course we also are members of the Conceive, Design, Implement, Operate organisation. So that's a worldwide organisation which looks at the kinds of skills that engineers need in order to be industry ready. So a lot of the way that I teach actually links up with that CDIO pedagogy as well, really making sure that our graduates are industry ready. So I help to produce society ready graduates, as I like to call them, and the engineers are producing industry ready graduates. And the important thing about the CDIO organisation is that they are very focused on embedding the social sciences and environmental sciences in everything that they do. So our engineering colleagues, all of the work they do is underpinned by environmental ethics, environmental sustainability, and working with social scientists in order to understand the broader problems. Because if you need to be industry ready as an engineer, then you need to be able to operate in a multidisciplinary environment, particularly in transport studies. So as a social scientist, I've spent most of my time working in engineering departments and with engineers, as well as a spell in the transport industry as well. So working interdisciplinarily, I think is a word, has been really important to my career and hopefully will be to our students' careers as well.
Let's talk a bit more about the impact that it's had on students and specifically what their response to all this content has been. What do you find when it comes to students? How do they engage with this? Is there anything that excites them more? Any things that they struggle with or don't enjoy having to do? What are your perspectives there?
Our students want to help to create a better world, and they're ready to be challenged. When students arrive with us, we do introduce them to a great many different perspectives. So we do ask challenging questions. For example, in the Introduction to Politics and IR module, one of the key topics that we explore is, well, should we change the world? Does the planet need saving? And what does that mean? Now, we, of course, don't challenge climate science at all. We're not climate deniers, and we make that very, very clear in our modules, but we do encourage our students to question, well, what do we mean when say that the planet needs saving? What do we mean when we say that we need to save the world? Because actually what comes out of that, and it's quite challenging for students to start to think in this way, is that mostly we're trying to save humans, and our students start to realise that we're trying to save a particular way of life in a particular way from certain perspectives. We encourage them to look critically at the UN Sustainable Development Goals, for example, and understand where they've come from and what the benefits and disbenefits of seeing sustainability in that way. We challenge the notion of sustainable development. Can development ever be sustainable? And what's really important to say at this point is that I believe it's really important to be professionally neutral when you're teaching, but to always be truthful. And I think that's a difficult balance to strike sometimes, but I think it's something that our students really appreciate. So we all teach from a professional neutral perspective. We encourage challenging critical thinking, but we're always trustworthy in what we're talking about as well. And we always encourage our students, we insist that our students are truthful in the way that they challenge this important issue as well.
I can really relate to that struggle as a trainee politics teacher and having delivered training on, say, carbon footprinting, where you get pushback, which isn't climate denial by any means, but there is perhaps a skepticism about some of the evidence that you're putting forward, and then you realise how incumbent it is on you as a teacher to know the information underlying it so that you can confidently rebut and explain the point at hand, but without browbeating, without talking anyone down, and without trying to pull any cheap tricks either to try to move on the teaching. So you've really got to be rounded and quite confident in your understanding there. I'm very interested, like you say, no surprise that students are keen, because again, something I've seen in my teaching is students frustrated at being told there's a problem and hungry for answers and for the kind of facilitation towards solutions actually that you were describing in your courses, which is brilliant. Let's talk about the kind of next steps then. So you've been running this and your colleagues have been running these programs for a long time. You must have an idea of things you'd still like to improve, the things that with a magic wand you might make a change to, or alternatively, where you're going to go next. What are the lessons you're going to take and put in place for the latest iteration, the latest validations of these programs? What are you thinking there?
Yeah, so I'm really excited to be developing with my colleagues across the faculty, particularly in the politics team itself, developing a course that we hope is going to really explore politics and global sustainability. So we're really excited about that at the moment and looking forward to developing that together. Where I'm very excited about my core modules that I teach, which really link our research with our teaching, that they're very student-led, they're very active, and we also co-create research with our students as well. So the amazing thing about the modules that I teach especially is that students do, at the end of it, they have a piece of work that they have created the question, they have done the research, albeit being guided towards doing the research, and it's their own piece of work. And I've presented at a number of conferences with my students talking about the work that they've done. Our students identify stakeholders themselves, so they have identified stakeholders from the Prime Minister and ministers to our local MP, to our own Vice-Chancellor, and encouraging them to disseminate their research to these people is something that I'm very excited about. Now that we are safely and securely post-COVID, hopefully I can start getting people back into the classroom so that our students can present to these people, local pressure groups, local businesses, our Vice-Chancellor, possibly even our MP, whoever that may be. As we're recording this, of course, we're not quite sure what will be happening in 6 weeks. So really excited about that. As well. In terms of how we teach, I'm really excited about exploring opportunities that we've got to use our innovative and sector-leading Hydra suite. So the Hydra suite is something that is used to train people in decision-making, and it exposes people to lots of uncertainty in a real-life immersive simulation. And actually that's going to be perfect for something like Insight for Impact or How to Change the World. I'm really looking forward to exploring how we might be able to bring that into our politics courses here. I'm very hopeful that we'll be able to sort of enhance our simulations. Lots of us already teach via simulations, hustings and Model UN and that kind of thing. But actually having an immersive environment, I think, is going to be quite exciting, looking at critical incidents in decision making. So exploring different content and different pedagogies, and importantly, always keeping it really fresh and student focused. We learn so much from our students. They come to us with issues and they ask us to teach certain subjects. Within the constraints of what we need to teach, we always try to respond to that as best we can. It's a changing world. We're teaching our students to be flexible, so we need to be flexible as well.
Yeah, the simulations is a really valuable teaching technique. I actually had a really fun one about a month or two ago when I myself played the UN Secretary General for one of these at a climate conference, which was in your school, actually. So that was fantastic. Just tell us a little bit more about the Hydra Suite as well. That's the first I'm hearing of it. I'd love to hear a little bit more.
Yeah, the Hydra Foundation is a separate foundation, separate to the university, and a number of universities now have a Hydra Suite, and it's used a lot by our policing team, our counter-terrorism teams, for example. It's used across the university at the moment. This will be the first time that we're bringing the Hydra Suite to politics students. I must emphasise that this is in development. It's something that we're looking to explore and bring to our students because it would be so useful, I think. And what is great is that you go into the suite, you have a number of different groups, and they each approach the same problem, and you can introduce different critical incidents in that. And again, this is very much in development, but thinking something like How to Change the World or Insight for Impact, you could identify your stakeholder who needs you to develop a briefing paper on a certain political issue, for example, and you could start to develop that, but we could then create a situation where incidents happen along the way. So you are acting as a parliamentary researcher, for example, briefing your MP, but perhaps a protest starts and you need to deal with that, respond to the changing political environment. Perhaps you are working with a business, something happens to your business and you need to handle and brief differently because we're starting to introduce different challenges. So it's all about teaching our students to respond to critical incidents is a really great way of helping them to learn how they could act in the real world as well, putting their knowledge and their skills really into practical use.
Brilliant. So we've spoken there about using simulations, we've spoken there about acting in an interdisciplinary fashion. We've spoken about engaging with other community groups and stakeholders as well. So we're starting to develop a bit of a package of advice we can give. But the final question I have for you is there any explicit advice or guidance that you might offer for colleagues who are thinking about how to embed sustainability into the content of their teaching and the practice of their teaching as well?
Be brave, don't be afraid to make mistakes, and be truthful. I think those are the three key things. Fourth, another one, involve your students. Listen to your students. And part of being brave is about listening to your students and responding to their needs as well. We aren't holders of knowledge. We're not sort of filling empty vessels with knowledge. We can learn from our students. They can bring problems to us and we can help them to solve those problems. And that's really, really important to me. And it's important to our students as well. Our students want, by and large, to be the change that they want to see. And we can support them to do that with knowledge, understanding and skills. So be brave and don't be afraid to make mistakes. Tell your students if you make a mistake. Tell them that you're learning and you're responding flexibly to what they want, and they will understand. It's just so important to be brave.
Absolutely. What you're describing of taking students on a journey into their agency as leaders and as citizens, you almost have to be able to show that in the classroom as well, to be able to show that they can have an impact on the content they're being taught and the way they're being taught it as well. It really begins there before they can begin to think about wider university policies or the community around them. So I really agree with that advice. Is there any final thoughts you have, Susan? Anything you haven't had the chance to talk to, anything you'd like to share with people who are listening?
I don't think so, actually. I think your questions have been perfectly illuminating. So thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this. And I'm looking forward to hearing all of the other contributors as well and to learning from them.
Fantastic. Thank you once again, Susan. Much appreciated.
You're very welcome.
My thanks again to Susan Kenyon for sharing with us what she and her colleagues have been doing to embed sustainability within politics and social sciences more widely. Thanks for joining us on the Teaching Transformations podcast. The podcast is a collaboration between the Academy for Sustainable Futures and the Careers and Enterprise Service at Canterbury Christ Church University. I've been your host, Jack Swan. Production and video editing is handled by Harry Cooper. The video version of the podcast was recorded by Harry King and Drew Shelley Winfield. Audio design and editing is managed by Matt Crawley. Additional equipment and recording space was organised by James Sanford and Kiara Hewer. Distribution and promotion is organised by Bethany Clemson. Special thanks go to Andrew Lombard and Felicity Brambling-Wells for all their support in helping us put together this Teaching Transformations podcast.